Welcome to Canada's hit talk show, A Travel Talk. And today we're very happy to have with us MP Blake Richards from the riding of Banff and Airdrie. Welcome to the show, Blake.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And also, just so you reminder, as we said in the introduction, Blake is the Shadow Minister for Tourism. So he's been gracious enough to join us today. And as you know, tourism is our wheelhouse here at ehCanadaTravel. So Blake, I've got a few questions for you, and our audience, and I know we've had some emails come in, are really interested to hear how your take on the tourism industry. As you all know, Blake, we've been devastated over here in tourism.
Mm-hmm.
We have clients selling houses. We have clients selling inventory. We have clients that aren't opening their doors. It's a scary situation. So we're very appreciative that you're on board here to allow us to ask you some questions, since you're very closely tied to the federal tourism industry. So Blake, on June 5th, the Tourism Ministry of Canada delivered a tourism recovery plan to the federal government. In this plan, they were asking the sector-specific support. So they were asking for some sector, regional tourism, provincial tourism support. And in the quote, which I found a little bit shocking, it said, to ensure Canada has a tourism industry post-pandemic. So I read this like, do something or we're not going to have tourism, period. I thought it was a little bit over the edge. So my question is, COVID has revealed some of the cracks in this tourism industry around the world, not just here in Canada. This is an international issue. It's also an opportunity. Is this not an opportunity to restructure, maybe even redistribute the responsibilities of tourism? Some would say maybe even demonopolize the tourism industry to some extent, to encourage working closer with innovators, entrepreneurs, us in the private sector, that in a lot of ways we are, the government tourism is not very appreciative of what we're trying to do. It's very hard to work with them. And is this not an opportunity, like we've done with the media, the corporations, seniors' homes, the police force? Everyone's restructuring. This has taught us a lot of things. What do you see tourism doing? Why is tourism not looking at some sort of restructuring process to be more efficient, to bring along more Canadians to help promote the industry?
Well, let me just answer that in a few parts, because I'd like to just kind of address the situation we face generally first. I mean, you mentioned the communique that came from Tourism Industry Association and warning of some potentially pretty dire consequences if there's no action taken to help the industry. And I find it hard to imagine that we would come to a place in Canada where there wouldn't be a tourism industry at all. I mean, we've got some of the most beautiful parts of the world here in Canada, so it's hard to imagine that. But it certainly is not that hard to imagine, unfortunately, the idea that maybe we have a tourism industry that looks a lot different than it does now. And I think the question that you're asking is really about, is there opportunity in this to make that something different be a positive? And it potentially could be. I will say, though, that I think, unfortunately, we're faced with a period of time here where things are going to be difficult for the tourism industry. They already have been, of course. I mean, with COVID, the industry was certainly first hit. And obviously hardest hit, because of the fact that, it's unlike any other type of business when we're talking about a situation like this one. Like, I've said many times, if you take a barber shop, or you take a shoe store, or whatever you might want to pick as a retail business, when things reopen, someone across the street comes in, gets a haircut, guy down the road comes in for a pair of shoes. That all, may not happen as quickly as we'd like, but it happens fairly quickly. With tourism, of course, there is a lot of lead time required, right? Marketing campaigns, you have to prepare for what does it look like in the airports, and be able to communicate that with people from other countries. So it can be incredibly difficult, and a lot more lead times required to get restarted. And that's why I think we're in for a prolonged period of difficulty for the tourism industry over and above anybody else. And probably almost 2 months ago now, the Prime Minister came out and said, there will be something specific for tourism. And since then, what we've seen is there's been a series of money that's been announced for like regional development agencies to undertake some projects to kind of help with a little bit of marketing or a little bit of personal protective equipment or things like that, like which are nobody is going to say is a bad thing, but it certainly doesn't go anywhere near where we need to go to try and help support the industry through what's probably going to be a very difficult period of time until next May, when the start of next year's tourism's prime season starts up. So I think the first part to the response here is that there needs to be a recognition at the government level that tourism is going to have to be viewed and treated very differently than many other parts of the economy, because of that recognition that it's not like we start again tomorrow. We start again at full tilt, hopefully next May at best. And so that's a reality that the government has to recognize and put the programs in place or adjust the programs that exist to fit that. And also, I think the other thing that's required is the government needs to come out with clear criteria on how the decisions will be made about when borders reopen, whether that be interprovincial borders or whether that be international borders, so that people can plan ahead for those openings. And I'm not saying that the government has to announce tomorrow, here's the date that this border or that border opens. But if we have an understanding of what the criteria will be that will have that cause that to happen, then people can plan for that. So that's the first step. The second thing is, is there an opportunity to rethink how things are done? And one of the things you mentioned was the idea of, is there monopolies or near monopolies that could be broken that would help to improve the tourism? And I mean, an example of that in my mind would be when it comes to our airline industries. We've got two carriers essentially in Canada, and should we look at, do we want to open that up a little more broadly to other international carriers to serve the domestic market? Because one of the challenges that we've always faced in Canada is the cost of air travel here. Now, reality is, because of how sparsely populated we are, we're probably never going to be able to compete with places that are far more densely populated on the prices. But could we have that be a little bit better if there was more competition? Yeah, probably we could. And if the cost comes down a little bit, I mean, Canada's on everybody's bucket list, right? Like everybody wants to come and see Canada, and for great reasons. I mean, we've from coast to coast to coast, we've got some of the most beautiful parts of the world, but we got to make sure that we don't put up barriers, and that can be visa requirements, that can be costs. There's all kinds of things. But here's an example of maybe we need to be looking at some of those things and figuring out how do we bring some of those costs down. So that might be one of those ways that because I do think with COVID, there's a lot of negative impacts here, but there are going to be positive impacts throughout everything we do, and ways that we view things differently and realize that maybe we could have done better all along. And this is no exception. So I do think there is opportunity in this, but it's first going to require the government to recognize that we have to do some things differently at a government level for tourism than we are for other industries that are very different. And if we start with that starting point, then the industry itself can figure the rest out. And I'm very confident in that.
Okay. With the tourism industry, we all know how it is. It's funded. It goes federally, regional, provincial, community. So it's like a funnel, vertical funnel, on how the funding is distributed. And with the recent funding that's come out, it's gone through, in this case, Western Diversification, the funding group there, and then it's funded down into the regionals and into the communities. Some of our client base that we have, and the individual frontline tourism businesses, their concerns is they've been sitting here and they're getting emails and they're getting CEO letters. We're here for you. Here's our 1-800 number. Here's the links to COVID. Here's operating safety protocols. But what they're really asking for is ideas. What they're really asking for is, how do we get out of this? I think in the industry, we all operate on summers. I agree with you. It's a 3-summer issue before we get respectable. I think this summer is going to be very tough. There's going to be a lot of fallout. Next summer is, I'm calling it a recovery summer, because it's going to be the first real summer. And then the third summer, we might actually have to address the international market and where it's at and what's happening. So our concern is in fact, because of this, there's a close relationship between public and private. And it tends to get hostile. And we don't understand the reasoning for that when we're all trying to achieve the same goal. We have a very a very successful program that is producing triple-digit increases in memberships, triple-digit increase in search engine optimization, triple-digit increases in social media followers, and it's built for small urban centers. It takes out the staff issue, takes out the funding issue, takes out the time issue, and all they have to do is create the information, and then our team develops it. And we just launched it, did an 18-month pilot, and then COVID hit. And the numbers are still off the chart. We have 4 new content marketers come on during COVID. The numbers actually during COVID compared to last year are still increasing. So more people are using the platform right now during COVID to plan staycations, to plan local marketing. So the thing is because I think one of the reasons we look at, when we look at the white papers and the webinars internationally and with the tourism strategists that we bring on the show, and we have good contacts around the world, is I think in Canada, one of the things that we're really is if we did have a solid private and public partnership with the same goal in mind, it would have made it a lot better, because what we're seeing, and a white paper just came out of Harvard, I think it was saying that because there is no partnership, what we're actually doing without actually knowing it is we're opening the doors for Airbnb, Booking.com, TripAdvisors to manage our brand, to scar the brand, and not allowing, and they're taking, as you know, 15 to 18% of every booking out of the country, which used to go to our sports teams, our sports fields, events, and all this. So there's a lot of things there that we're trying to do. So my question is, how would the Conservative Party of Canada show their support to improve this public-private tourism relationship, and maybe even start supporting the privates, because they're the innovators. They're coming out with all these new programs. They're coming out with all these different type of technology. How can the Conservative Party bond that relationship? Because it's not just with us. We are the largest privately operated, but there is thousands and thousands of people with all us little privates that we employ, but we're always having an uphill battle. So what would the Conservatives do to build that relationship?
Well, I think there's two key words here. The first one is alignment, and the second one is communication. And it's with that communication that you get the alignment in the marketing. And what I mean when I say that is, you identified correctly. Like there's the federal level marketing campaigns that occur with Destination Canada. There's the provincial level. There's the DMO level, and then of course there's the private operator. So there's sort of 4 parts in that marketing, and if they're not aligned, then we're not succeeding with our marketing to the degree that we should be and that we could be. And I think what I'll say is that I think someone has to show leadership in order to create that alignment, and someone has to be able to start communicating better. And I think that the place best positioned to do that is at the top, right? The federal level. Yeah. And I will say that when Destination Canada, when we were last in government, I was a part of the tourism file then in government, and Destination Canada, we put under new leadership. David Goldstein was the person we put in charge of, and what happened there was that it really changed the culture, I think, at Destination Canada to a larger degree. Became less bureaucratic and more oriented towards solutions and market-driven processes and things like that. And I think the alignment did improve from the perspective of, I don't believe that prior to that really there was even proper alignment from the federal level to even the provincial level on these things. Yeah. But I do really believe that that's something that's greatly improved in the last 6 or 8 years. And it started to improve somewhat to bring that alignment down to the DMO level, at least for some of the bigger DMOs. But I think that the smaller DMOs still get left out of that to too much of a degree, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be hurting the most now. And then bringing that down to the private sector level to deal with individual operators and giving them an opportunity. So I think what we could do best here is to communicate down the line the marketing campaigns and what the goals that are trying to be achieved there are. Get feedback on those, and then figure out ways that we can include anyone who wants to be a part of those. That doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be funding for that, but it might, it may be in some cases that will mean that, but it will certainly mean that at the very least, there is information communicated back and forth, two-way communication about what that marketing campaign is going to look like. And there's going to be opportunities provided for people to piggyback on that campaign at the very least, so that everything's in alignment. Because the more there's a common message and a common theme, the better success we're going to have with those marketing campaigns. And as you say, the better chance we'll have of actually driving that business directly to those private operators, the small businesses that need that support. So I think it's about communication first and then alignment.
Just a little a segue off of that. If for instance, if Destination BC is going to get anywhere from 50 to 72 million when they peaked on their funding for a year, why is it so hard to put a very small percentage of funding into the private sector that promotes tourism? Why is that such a problem when 50 million not enough, that they can't spare a little bit to help all the privates out there that are doing marketing? Because there are some pretty powerful influencers out there that have millions of followers, and including there's websites like us that are well over 1 million of travelers we help every year, 2, 3 million, 4 million, I think we're hitting. And why is it so hard for the funnel to put out programs that help the private tourism ones? Not like us, I think we're going to be fine. We have a whole bunch of other programs we do, but there's a lot of the privates that are going to disappear. They're going to be done. And so I'm just wondering, why is this such a tough decision?
I don't really think it is, or it shouldn't be anyway. I mean, I've said this for years now. I think the way that this could look is, especially where private initiatives are putting marketing funds in. Could we not, to show recognition that they're putting that effort in themselves, could we not match that? Maybe that's a way of doing that. You have matching funds, which shows, you've got some skin in the game. We'll come in and match and play alongside that. Okay. That might be the way to do that. So I don't think it's a difficult thing. I think it could be done. And I think it needs to be done, as I say, with communication and proper alignment of those campaigns. But as long as that occurs, why couldn't that happen? I don't see any reason. And if we say, summers are going to, and you're absolutely correct. Like this summer we've pretty well lost it. Yep. Next summer, as you say, I think a good way of putting it, it's a recovery summer. There'll be some return, but it won't be a full return. And hopefully you're right. Year 3, then it's a full return. So maybe in the meantime, we've got to be doing everything we can to encourage more Canadians to see other parts of their country, because that'll come back sooner than the international travel will, obviously. And also winter. We've got some great opportunities in winter in this country. Why aren't we promoting that more? That'll be the first opportunity people are going to have to travel again. Why would we not say, hey, guess what? There's some great experiences here in Canada in the winter. So I think if we can align on those things, there's all kinds of opportunity here for us to gain some pieces that we didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good point, because winter tourism is, in our view, is our second peak tourism, and it is a industry or a sector of seasoning tourism that many communities are begging for. This seems to be the winners of the winter tourism are the ski hills and maybe 100 kilometers around them that get benefit. Yep. But there's the rest of the country where, I don't think we do a good enough job at our snowmobile industry. I don't think we do a good enough at cross-country skiing, ice fishing.
Those are great examples. Those are great examples. I mean, I know that many Canadians enjoy that stuff. But they maybe don't go very far to do it. They might just, be in their own backyards. And there's probably a lot of international visitors that would just love those opportunities if we gave them to them.
Yeah. So if there's Blake, of many tourism markets, and this is, I got this from one of our resort marketers actually in your backyard there that I was talking to a couple weeks ago. Many tourism markets rely on international travel, especially in Canada, for the revenues, and then also for staffing. If we do not have our domestic tourism in place, they're saying in September we'll lose about 60% of job loss in the tourism industry if we don't have it in place, our domestic tourism. And then according to the World Travel Tourism Council, that jumps up to almost 80% if we're not settled in by the winter. So the question here is, if current Canada right now, based on, I think it was the UNWTO said, we run at about a 30% domestic tourism market in our country, while other countries like Australia have an 80% domestic tourism market. So what programs or partnerships are in place now, and what programs do you think the Conservative Party of Canada would propose to maybe put more emphasis on domestic tourism, so we don't have this problem and it's not such a big climb? Because the next 3 years, that's our bread and butter, is domestic.
Mm-hmm. Well, first I'd say, when you talk about the kind of numbers that you just mentioned, and I don't think they're inaccurate in any way, 60% loss of tourism jobs. Mm-hmm. Being one of the largest employers in Canada, I think, tourism employs about 1 out of every 10 people.
Yeah.
If you're talking a 60% or more loss of jobs in the tourism industry, you're talking over 1 million people losing their jobs. Scary. So if there isn't already enough reason for the government to realize how important it is that we get this figured out, mm-hmm. That should be a good reason right there. And I mean, we've already talked about it. Domestic tourism could be a big part of that solution. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the things we've already talked about are some of the barriers and challenges that exist to it. Like, I talked about the competition in the airline industry and how that might drive down some prices of airline costs. At the end of the day, let's face it, Canadians, I don't think they choose to not visit other parts of the country because they don't want to. They choose to not visit other parts of the country and instead choose a place like an all-inclusive in Mexico, or, even in some cases over to Europe, because it's actually cheaper to do that than it is to go visit another part of the country.
Yeah. That's
ridiculous.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And that needs to change. So some of those things are long-term fixes, like you don't fix that overnight. But maybe in the interim, and I'm not proposing anything specific right now, but I mean, the questions we need to ask are, is there things we need to do to create some incentives for Canadians to see the other parts of the country right now? That might be a good question to be asking. And on the long term, how do we reduce some of that cost that puts up the barrier to visit another part of Canada? Like, it shouldn't cost more to go from Winnipeg to Halifax to see Nova Scotia, for example, than it would to go from there to, Cancun.
Yeah.
Stay there. So there's a good starting point.
Okay. So if just a little tag onto that, we did a 10-year study. My brother and I we went all across Canada. We visited over 1,000 communities, 6,000. We studied the whole country for 10 years, sold the farm, sold everything. And we decided we wanted to promote tourism. And we went all the way from the Arctic Ocean, Inuvik to St. John, everything. And here's one message that we came across. The Eastern Canada has no idea about Western Canada, and Western Canada has no idea of the tourism opportunities in Eastern Canada. So is it coming down to maybe we really need to work on an education process here to educate Canadians what's available, or is it strictly they're not interested?
No, I don't think it's the fact that Canadians aren't interested. I bring this up with people all the time, and I say, have you ever been, and I'm obviously from Alberta, I'll say, have you ever been to the Maritimes, for example? And, most people could say they haven't, and they'll all say, oh yeah, I'd like to someday, but oh man, that's expensive, or, maybe I'll get around to it one day. So it's not that they're not interested. I think there's a couple things. First of all, we've never really I don't think we've ever really properly promoted those opportunities domestically to other parts of the country. And hopefully that COVID will change that. That's one thing that hopefully will come out of this as a positive. Mm-hmm. And I think the other side of it is like the cost again is a factor in that. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can figure those pieces out, and perhaps that starts with looking at, is there ways we can incentivize that? And maybe it's simply just promoting it. I don't know, but maybe it requires more. So I think those are the questions that we have to ask, is how we do that. Because there's far too few Canadians that can say, like you can say, and like I actually can say now. I've had a chance to visit every province and every territory in this country. I bet you there's very few Canadians that can say that.
Yeah.
Now I probably haven't had as extensive as you have, because some of those have been literally out for a day for meetings. But I can still say I've been there and I've seen it, and I've whetted my appetite enough that I'd like to go back, and I will do that. But that's the thing. We've got to whet people's appetite, and I have no doubt that we'll be successful in doing that.
Yeah. Here's the $1 million question. This is the one that we're getting from our clientele. And we sort of touched on this too, Blake, is that many of us in the industry realize, maybe our industry is maybe 70-30 summer, winter tourism. And majority of the businesses out there are 98%, I think was the last number I read, are small to medium sized tourism businesses. And they rely on 3 to 4 months of revenues to pay for 12 months of bills. And it's a concerning issue for many of them. So now that we're beginning to sort of remove the travel restrictions, we're sort of entering this new tourism reality, because let's face it, the old playbook ain't going to work. We're going to need to rewrite a new playbook. How does Canadians are going to have to embrace staycations for us to get through this. They're going to have to venture out a little bit, spend their money. The ones that do have money will determine what communities and businesses are going to survive this whole COVID thing. So as a shadow minister of tourism for the Conservative Party of Canada, what is your advice for small, medium travel tourism businesses right now that maybe can't access the $40,000, the $40,000 available through the government, which again, a lot of them don't want to take on that debt load. They can't take on that debt load. It's a loan. It's not a fund. And the second thing is you got your small business employee benefits to help pay for their employees. But a lot of people in our business, our employees are in Australia. They're not even here yet. So what would you suggest to these businesses that are out there? And there's a big chunk of them there that are in the middle that can't go either way.
Well, honestly, I think this comes down to it's difficult. I get it. Like this is a challenging time, and it's survival mode, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest about things.
Yep,
it's survival
it
mode, and it's survival mode for a extended period of time. Unfortunately, that's reality.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that there are things the government can do that send signals that can help that extended period of time to be a little less extended. And so I think that what I've advised a lot of people I've spoken to is you need to impress this upon the government. So it's calling your local member of parliament and saying, hey, I'd like to sit down, come into your office, or a video meeting, I guess, if that's more appropriate in the times, depending on your province and where they're at with health restrictions. But I'd like to chat with you about the challenges that my business faces. You can't talk about the tourism industry. You got to talk about the challenges your business is facing. Mm-hmm. And you can encourage other business owners to do the same. Encourage your employees to do that too. Talk about their jobs. Because when a politician hears about those impacts on a business or a person that's employed in their riding, it hits home and it becomes a reality. And if they hear it from 20, 30, 100 people, now they start to really sit up and take notice. And that's when you'll get them pushing their, on people like the finance minister, on people like the prime minister or the tourism minister to take the measures that are needed, right? So go and talk to them about the challenges that are faced to try and just survive, so that there will be, to go back to Tylak's point, so that there will be a tourism industry left in this country to serve our guests when we get to the point where we're able to do that. That's the best advice I can give. I know people say one person can't make the difference, but actually it's only one person that can make the difference, because if nobody ever steps up, then clearly there's not going to be a voice. Yeah. So if one person steps up and then one more person steps up and then one more, soon we have 100, we have 200. Now it's something that gets noticed. And that's, to me, outside of, trying to do everything you can to encourage people to come and visit your businesses, whether it's local, from other parts of the country, it's, if we want to really help to ensure a future, we've got to get the government on board too.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up a really interesting point. One of the things we noticed when we did our 10-year study, talking with 1,000 communities, over 10,000 businesses, and this is a really interesting point. Their big beef is the programs available to them are built for urban centers. Mm-hmm. There's nothing out there for small communities. They don't have the staff, the skill, the time, and everything out there. And the big thing they're saying is, yeah, we get it. We need to talk to our MP, but I don't have the skills to make an ad. I don't have the skills to do this. I don't have the time, and I can't hire more staff. We don't have the budget for more staff. So this beautiful, bright, shiny urban marketing tourism program platform doesn't cut it for us. So it might work in Toronto, might work in Vancouver, might work in Halifax, work in Banff, the ones that have that really good generation of revenue. But small towns are in a tight spot here, and that's why we built our program. But there's nothing else out there for them that they can access.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that is one of the challenges here, is that things have been designed as unfortunately far too often it happens with government programs. They are sort of forgetting about some of the smaller communities. And let's face it, a lot of the best tourism destinations in our country are in those smaller markets. They're in remote areas because that's where the beauty is.
Yep.
And so they are forgotten in that regard. I think it also extends that sometimes it's small businesses rather than large corporations. And you pointed out earlier, 98% of the businesses in tourism are small businesses. Mm-hmm. So we've got to structure things so they work for small businesses, not just the big ones. Mm-hmm. Those are two of the problems. And then I think even beyond that, it's also the recognition that seasonal industries can't be treated the same as a retail business that's open and serving people at the same level 365 days a year.
Totally agree.
So all three of those things are problems right now. And honestly, that's exactly why people need to reach out to their representatives, because those three things are huge problems, and they all attack the tourism industry, unfortunately. And it's a perfect storm almost. So we have to impress upon our government officials that this needs to, change. Yeah. We have to recognize that reality.
Okay. Well, Blake, it's been an honor, and thank you for your time. Is there, before we let you go, is there the best way for our audience to contact you as their tourism shadow minister? What would be the best way?
Well, I would tell people my website, blakerichards.ca, has all of my contact information, phone number, email, social media links. Okay. But it also has, I have a tourism newsletter that I keep in touch with people through, and it's a two-way communication. I'm usually asking for your feedback. So if you're interested in kind of being updated on what's happening, some of the, getting your chance to have feedback into the things that are being brought to the government, sign up for my tourism newsletter there as well. So that website at blakerichards.ca, you can do all of that there.
Okay. So to our followers,
I'm always happy to hear from people, and I'm happy to try and do what I can to help in any instance where you've got issues with the government. So
yeah. Look out!
Oh, I know. I just
you must have a busy email box.
Yeah, it can be pretty full sometimes. Yeah.
Well, good on you for sticking up for tourism, Blake. We all appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And do you have any closing remarks you'd like to leave with our Canadians and international viewers? Anything you'd like to leave with them?
Well, I'll just say two things. First of all, to the people who are listening and watching, that our potential visitors, whether they be coming from international points, when we have that ability to do that again, or whether it be Canadians that have thought, maybe I'd like to visit another part of the country, this is a good time to do it.
Yep.
You're going to have, what's best about Canada is that we have these wide open spaces. We've got this beautiful landscapes, and this right now is the best time you'll ever have to enjoy those things. So take advantage of that. And the second thing I'll say is to the people who are our hardworking tourism operators out there, the people that are employed in our tourism industry, keep your chin up. I know it's easy to say and harder to do because it's a difficult time, and I know that. But you can keep your chin up because there are people, myself included, who are out there fighting for you.
Excellent. And just for your viewers, ehCanada is also one out there fighting for you.